Imagine a man standing on a stage, the spotlight burning into his eyes while the world laughs. But he is not telling a joke, he is screaming a warning. For over 10 years, the massive machinery of the entertainment industry worked overtime to convince you that Katt Williams was a lost cause. They painted a picture of a man spiraling into madness, a man whose mind had fractured under the weight of his own ego and erratic impulses. They wanted you to look at the headlines and see a punchline. But look at the world today. Look at the headlines surfacing in this year of 2026. The statues are toppling. The gatekeepers who once held the keys to the kingdom are retreating into their bunkers, clutching their non-disclosure agreements like shields. And suddenly, those so-called crazy rants from a decade ago sound less like a breakdown and more like a detailed, tactical map of a massive crime scene. What you are about to hear is the information they tried to bury under a decade of character assassination and tabloid distraction. This is not just a collection of rumors. This is the blueprint of a system designed to manufacture idols and then devour them. It is a world where the red carpet hides a trail of blood, and where the price of admission is something you can never get back. We have been told for generations that Hollywood is the land of dreams. But for those who have actually stepped behind the curtain, it is a sophisticated, high-stakes trap. It is a machine that identifies your deepest desires and turns them into a leash. Think about the sheer gravity of $50 million. Close your eyes and try to visualize that amount of paper. It is a weight that can either crush a man's soul or buy his silence for a lifetime. When Dave Chappelle stood at the absolute peak of the mountain and walked away from that staggering sum, the industry did not just let him walk into the sunset. They turned the cannons of the media directly at his head. They used the same playbook they always use when a valuable asset refuses to be owned. If you will not take the salt, you must be insane. Chappelle fled to Africa, not because he was losing his mind, but because he was trying to save his life. He described the industry using the chilling analogy of a baboon trap. In the jungle, they put a lump of salt in a hole. The baboon reaches in, grabs the salt, and his fist becomes too large to pull back out. The hunter approaches, and all the baboon has to do to survive is let go. But he cannot. The desire for the salt is stronger than the instinct for survival. In this town, the salt is the fame, the celebrity, and the validation. Once you grab it, you are anchored to the machine. You belong to them. But Katt Williams was the one who refused to even reach into the hole. He chose the path of the pariah, standing on the outside and pointing at the hunters, while everyone else was busy licking the salt. He spoke of gatekeepers who demand a sacrifice of dignity before they grant a seat at the table. He talked about the rituals of humiliation that stars must endure to prove their loyalty to the system. For years, his colleagues laughed and the public dismissed him. They called him a conspiracy theorist. They called him unstable. But as the federal raids began to hit the mansions of the elite, and as the names of the most powerful people in media started appearing on flight logs to private islands, the laughter died down. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that the madman was the only person in the room who was actually awake. But why now? Why is the wall of silence finally cracking after all these decades? To understand the answer, you have to understand the nature of the trap itself. It is a system built on the premise that you have more to lose by speaking out than by staying quiet. It relies on the absolute control of the narrative. But in an age where the gatekeepers can no longer burn the books or stop the signal, the truth is leaking through the floorboards. We are witnessing the collapse of a psychological empire. We are seeing what happens when the people who were sold as our moral compasses are revealed to be the very monsters they warned us about. The transition from a beloved icon to a cautionary tale happens in the blink of an eye. One day you are on the cover of every magazine, and the next you are a ghost, edited out of the history of the very industry you helped build. But Katt Williams is still here. He is the glitch in the matrix that the programmers could not delete. He is the living proof that there is a cost to keeping your soul, and that cost is often your career, your reputation, and your peace of mind. But as the shadow falls over the hills of Los Angeles, it is becoming clear that the price of selling your soul is infinitely higher. Let us look at the facts that they do not want you to connect. Let us look at the ledgers where human trauma is calculated as a business expense. Let us look at the people who were positioned as the guardians of the culture while they were secretly presiding over its decay. We are going to peel back the layers of this high-glamour horror story, starting with the documents that prove this was never just about art. It was always about control. But to understand the endgame, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to look at the moments where the mask slipped, and the world was too distracted to notice. We have to look at the specific mechanisms of the trap, and the individuals who were brave enough to try and spring it. The air in those high-level boardrooms is different. It is recycled, filtered through the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of unspoken fear. We often imagine evil as something chaotic, something lurking in a dark alleyway with a jagged knife. But in the corridors of power that Katt Williams warned us about, evil is organized. It is clinical. It is written in 12-point font on heavy cream-colored stationery. It has a signature at the bottom and a corporate seal. To truly understand the trap, you have to look at the documents that surfaced during the fall of the giants. You have to look at the contracts that treated human dignity like a depreciating asset. Take the case of Harvey Weinstein. For decades, he was the kingmaker, the man who could hand you a golden statue or erase your name from the industry with a single phone call. But the most terrifying thing about his reign was not just the whispers in the hallways. It was the paperwork. His employment contract was a masterpiece of institutionalized depravity. It contained a specific, tiered payout schedule for sexual harassment claims. Think about the cold, calculating mind required to draft such a thing. It was not a safety net for victims. It was a price list for silence. The document laid it out with the same boredom you would find in a lease agreement for a fleet of office copiers. If there was a first offense, the company would pay out $100,000. For a second offense, the price went up to $250,000. By the third time a human being was violated, the ledger accounted for $750,000. And if the cycle reached a fourth instance, the check was written for $1 million. This was not a punishment. It was a budget. The board of directors knew exactly what was happening behind those closed, heavy oak doors. They had calculated the cost of agony and decided it was a manageable business expense. They had turned the destruction of lives into a line item, squeezed between marketing costs and travel stipends. This is what it means when the whistleblowers talk about a system that is rigged from the inside. When a young actor or actress enters that world, they think they are joining a creative community. They do not realize they are stepping into a machine that has already factored in their ruin. The gatekeepers created an environment where abuse was not a glitch. It was the fuel. And to keep this machine running, they needed a wall of silence so thick that no scream could penetrate it. This is where the non-disclosure agreements come in, the infamous NDAs. In the Virgin Islands, the Attorney General stood before the world and provided testimony that sounded like a script from a dystopian thriller. She spoke of Jeffrey Epstein's island, Little St. James, but she was not just talking about the geography. She was talking about the legal fortress he built around his crimes. Every employee, from the pilots of the private jets to the people cleaning the floors, was forced to sign lifetime non-disclosure agreements. These were not just standard business contracts. They were psychological chains. They ensured that if you saw something horrific, if you saw powerful politicians, world leaders, or Hollywood royalty engaging in the unthinkable, you were legally bound to take that secret to your grave. The threat was not just a lawsuit. The threat was the total erasure of your life. If you spoke, the system would use its infinite resources to crush you. They would tie you up in court for 100 years. They would destroy your credit. They would blackball your family. and they would make sure you never worked again. This is the selling of the soul that Katt Williams was describing. It starts with a contract you do not fully understand, signed in a moment of excitement and desperation. You think you are signing up for a career. In reality, you are signing away your right to have a conscience. The gatekeepers know that fame is the ultimate drug. They know that once you have tasted the adoration of millions, you will do almost anything to keep it. They use that hunger to turn victims into accomplices. They bring you into the fold, show you the dark secrets of those above you, and then they watch you. Once you have seen what happens in the shadows, you are in, but you are also a hostage. You are now part of the collective silence. If you speak out against the monster next to you, you risk exposing the entire structure that supports your own lifestyle. This is why the reaction to whistleblowers is always so violent and coordinated. When someone like Katt Williams or Dave Chappelle breaks ranks, they are not just attacking one person. They are threatening the entire ledger. They are threatening the salt that keeps everyone else in their place. The industry reacts like a white blood cell attacking a virus. It identifies the truth teller and begins the process of liquidation. They do not just fire you, they attempt to unmake you. They use their connections in the media to leak stories about your mental instability. They have their late-night hosts make jokes about your downfall. They turn your peers against you until you are standing alone in a cold, empty room, wondering if the $50 million was worth your sanity. But as the year 2026 progresses, we are seeing the limits of this control. The digital age has created a ledger that cannot be so easily erased. The testimonies are piling up. The numbers, the 100,000, the 1 million, the countless lives broken for the sake of a quarterly profit report, are finally being read aloud. The corporate mask is slipping, revealing the hollow, predatory eyes underneath. And as we look closer at those who were tasked with being the public face of this industry, we begin to see the cracks in the porcelain. We begin to see that the most trusted names in our homes were often the most dedicated protectors of the trap. For years, the architecture of Hollywood was held together by a specific kind of mortar, the trusted face. To keep the machine running, the system needed more than just lawyers and contracts. It needed icons who could look into the camera lens and convince the world that everything was fine. It needed the gatekeepers. These are the individuals positioned as the moral high ground, the ultimate arbiters of taste and truth. And at the very top of that mountain sat Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres. One was the mother of the nation, the other was the neighbor everyone wanted to have. But if you look at the footage through the lens of the prophecy Katt Williams laid out, the warmth of those studio lights begins to feel like the glare of an interrogation room. Oprah Winfrey has built a multi-billion-dollar empire on the foundation of empathy and spiritual growth. She is the woman who supposedly made people, the one who could turn a book into a bestseller or a person into a household name with a single nod. But the list of names she has stood beside is becoming harder to ignore. When the world finally saw the true face of Harvey Weinstein, people began to look at the archives. They saw the photographs of Oprah embracing him, the interviews where she lauded his genius. When Jeffrey Epstein's network was exposed, the connections were there again. When the raids hit the homes of Diddy, the patterns repeated. It is a strange, recurring coincidence that the most powerful woman in media was always within arm's reach of the most prolific predators in the industry. But perhaps it was not a coincidence at all. Perhaps that is the role of the ultimate gatekeeper, to provide a shield of respectability. If Oprah likes you, you must be a good person. That is the logic the public followed for decades. But remember what happened when Dave Chappelle walked away from his $50 million. He did not go to a doctor. He went to Oprah's couch. And instead of focusing on the corruption he was fleeing, the narrative shifted toward his mental health. The gatekeeper's job is to maintain the walls of the pen. If a sheep escapes, the gatekeeper's task is to convince the rest of the flock that the one who left was simply sick. Then there is the case of Ellen DeGeneres. For nearly 20 years, her brand was built on two simple words: be kind. She danced through the aisles, handed out checks, and made the world feel safe. But in 2020, the porcelain mask shattered. The reports that emerged from behind the scenes of her show described a culture of fear, intimidation, and a toxic atmosphere that stood in direct opposition to her public persona. Employees spoke of being told not to look her in the eye. They spoke of a workplace where harassment was ignored and where the "be kind" mantra was used as a weapon to silence those who were suffering. But the most haunting chapter of this story is not a workplace complaint. It is a tragedy that left the world paralyzed in December of 2022. Stephen Boss, known to millions as Twitch, was more than just a DJ on Ellen's stage. He was the heartbeat of the show, the executive producer, and the man who stood by Ellen's side for nearly 8 years. He was the personification of joy, a father of 3 with a beautiful family and a career that seemed untouchable. And then, on a cold Tuesday morning, he walked out of his home and checked into a motel located just 1 mile away. Think about that distance. 1 mile. He didn't disappear into the wilderness. He stayed within the shadow of his own life. At the age of 40, a man who had everything the baboon trap offers, the fame, the money, the elite status, chose to end his story in a sterile room with a single gunshot. The industry quickly pivoted to the standard talking points of mental health and secret struggles. But for those who listen to the warnings of Katt Williams, the questions go deeper. Why would a man who spent 8 years at the center of the Hollywood machine choose a motel room so close to his home? What did he see during those 8 years? There are whispers, unverified but persistent, that the note he left behind contained references to the environment he had been a part of. While the public may never see the full truth of those words, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. A man who was the face of Hollywood's joy could no longer live with what he knew. The tragedy of Twitch is the ultimate indictment of the system. It shows us that even those who seem to have successfully navigated the trap, those who have made it to the highest levels of the inner circle, are often carrying a weight that is literally impossible to bear. This is the darker side of the Gatekeepers world. To maintain the illusion of the perfect show or the moral empire, the people on the inside have to witness the grinding of the gears. They have to see the bodies that are fed into the machine to keep the lights bright. They have to sign the non-disclosure agreements that turn them into silent witnesses to their own destruction. And sometimes, the gap between the person dancing on the screen and the person sitting in that motel room becomes too wide to bridge. The gatekeepers are not just there to keep the bad people out, they are there to keep the truth in. They are the human filters who ensure that the darkness of the soul-selling industry is never seen by the people buying the tickets and watching the ads. But as Katt Williams warned, the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how much salt you pour over it. The idols are falling, and the silence that used to protect them is being replaced by a roar of questions that can no longer be ignored. To understand the final stage of the trap, you have to leave the mainland behind. You have to travel to a place where the laws of nations are replaced by the whims of a predator. Katt Williams frequently alluded to a dark underbelly, but the physical manifestation of that darkness was a small, sun-drenched patch of land in the Virgin Islands known as Little St. James. It was here that the system of selling one's soul moved from a metaphor into a brutal physical reality. This was not just a retreat for the wealthy. It was a high-tech laboratory for the manufacture of leverage. The Attorney General of the Virgin Islands provided testimony that strips away any remaining illusions of glamour. She described a sophisticated, multi-layered trafficking network that functioned with the precision of a Swiss watch. It involved private jets, helicopters, and a fleet of boats, all synchronized to move human beings like cargo. But the most chilling detail was the geography itself. In her official statement, She posed a question that should haunt anyone who believes in the choice of the victims. Once you get on that island, how do you get off? It is not as if a person can simply decide to swim to St. Thomas. This was the ultimate enclosure. When you are on that island, you are in a vacuum. You are surrounded by the deep blue indifference of the Caribbean Sea, and the only way out is through the man who brought you there. This physical isolation was the perfect environment for the creation of total, unbreakable blackmail. According to multiple sources and emerging evidence in this year of 2026, the entire island was wired for sound and video. Every room, every corridor, and every secluded corner was a stage. The powerful guests, the politicians, the tech moguls, the Hollywood elite, thought they were indulging in their darkest desires in total secrecy. In reality, they were being recorded in high definition. They were being handed the salt, just as Dave Chappelle described, but the salt was a setup. The moment they engaged in the horrific acts prepared for them, they ceased to be powerful men and women. They became assets. They became property. This is the soul selling in its most literal form. You trade your integrity for a moment of protected vice, only to realize that the person holding the camera now owns your future, your reputation, and your freedom. You cannot blow the whistle on the system because you are now a documented part of its crimes. Even after the primary architect of this island abyss was declared dead in a jail cell, the trap did not spring open. The estate of the predator continued to enforce those lifetime non-disclosure agreements, with a ferocity that suggests the secrets are still being guarded by those who remain in power. Employees were reminded that the non-disclosure was not just a suggestion, it was a life sentence. The threat was clear. If the tapes were to ever see the light of day, the collapse would not just take down a few individuals. It would level the entire structure of the global elite. This is the blackmail machine that Katt Williams was warning us about when he spoke of the gatekeepers and the people who own the stars. It is a pyramid of compromat. At the bottom are the young and the desperate, lured in by the promise of fame. In the middle are the stars and executives who have been compromised and are now forced to play the game to protect themselves. And at the top are the individuals who hold the archives, the people who decide who stays in the spotlight and who is cast into the outer darkness. The industry preys on children, as Joe Rogan so bluntly stated. It seeks out the vulnerable because they are the easiest to trap and the hardest to believe when they finally find the courage to speak. We are looking at an industry that does not just produce movies and music, it produces silence. It produces a culture where everyone knows what is happening behind the closed doors of the hotel suites and on the private islands, but no one dares to be the first to point the finger. But as the court cases of 2026 unfold, the geography of the trap is being mapped out for the world to see. We are learning about the black books, the flight logs, and the secret rooms. We are seeing that the glamour of the Hollywood lifestyle was often just the bait for a hook that goes all the way through the heart. The walls of the island are finally being breached, not by swimmers, but by the relentless tide of the truth. The people who thought their secrets were buried in the sand of a private beach are waking up to find that the tide has gone out, leaving their legacy exposed to the harsh, unyielding light of day. The question is no longer what happened on the island. The question is, who is still protecting the people who were there? The silence of the successful is often the loudest scream in Hollywood. It is one thing for a struggling actor to claim the system is rigged, but it is another thing entirely when an Academy Award winner, a man who has touched the very sun of cinematic achievement, admits he is paralyzed by fear. Roger Avery, the brilliant mind behind the screenplay of Pulp Fiction, once stood before an audience and spoke about the sacrifices happening in the hills of Los Angeles. But when pressed for names, when asked to point the finger at the architects of this suffering, he retreated into a terrifying honesty. He said he did not want to say names because he did not want to be sued, And more importantly, he did not want to be dead. Think about the weight of that statement coming from a man of his stature. In the year 2026, we like to believe we live in a transparent society where the truth is just a click away. But in the corridors where the soul-selling deals are brokered, the penalty for breaking your silence is still terminal. This is the reality Katt Williams was navigating every time he stepped onto a stage to deliver his manic truth. He wasn't just fighting for his career, he was fighting for his heartbeat. He knew that the industry does not just take your talent, it attempts to take your very essence. The term selling your soul has been used so often that it has almost become a cliché, a metaphor for a few bad creative choices. But when you listen to the insiders, when you look at the warnings from people like Joe Rogan, you realize the phrase is chillingly literal. Rogan, a man who has interviewed everyone from world leaders to the deepest industry insiders, issued a warning that should resonate in every household. He told the world to keep their children away from this industry because the industry does not just manage children, it preys on them. It is a market where the innocence of the young is the most valuable currency, traded between predators who hide behind the titles of agents, managers, and mentors. This is the soul market that Katt Williams exposed. It is a system where your dignity is the collateral for your success. To get the lead role, to get the stadium tour, to get the billion-dollar distribution deal, you must first prove that you are willing to lose yourself. You must show the gatekeepers that there is no line you will not cross, no secret you will not keep, and no act you will not perform. Once you have made that trade, you are no longer a person. You are a brand, a piece of intellectual property, owned by a conglomerate that views your mental health as a secondary concern to your profit margin. But the reckoning is here. The digital age has done what decades of internal protests could not. It has made the cost of the lie higher than the cost of the truth. The traditional gatekeepers, the Oprahs and the Ellens of the world, no longer hold a monopoly on the narrative. The public is no longer satisfied with the polished apologies and the carefully crafted public relations statements. We are looking back at the last decade and realizing that every time they told us someone was crazy, they were actually telling us that person was dangerous to the status quo. Katt Williams was the most dangerous man in Hollywood because he was the only one who didn't care about the $50 million. He didn't care about the invite to the private island. He cared about being able to look at himself in the mirror when the house lights went down. As we move deeper into this year of 2026, the architecture of the baboon trap is crumbling. The salt is losing its flavor, the idols are being dragged from their pedestals, and the survivors are finally finding their voices. The wall of silence that Roger Avery feared has developed cracks that no amount of legal threats can fill. We are witnessing the end of an era of impunity, and while the process is messy and the revelations are horrific, it is the only way to clear the path for something better. We want to thank you for spending this time with us as we navigated the shadows of an industry in transition. Your attention is the only thing that ensures these stories continue to be told. If you found this investigation insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It truly helps us fight against the algorithms that prefer silence over the truth. We would also like to ask you, after seeing the evidence and hearing the warnings from those who were actually in the room, do you believe the industry can ever truly be reformed? Or is the system of selling souls so deeply embedded in the foundation of Hollywood that the only solution is to burn it down and start over? Have you ever felt that the celebrities you once admired were hiding a darker reality behind their public image? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them, and your perspective is a vital part of this conversation. If you find it difficult to find the words because of the gravity of what we have discussed, just write, "Thank you" for the work. It means a lot to our team and keeps us going. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The truth is out there, but you have to be willing to look past the glitter to see it.